The afternoon sun burned over the empty highway when three black boys, Malik, Jalen, and Darius, stopped their bikes beside a shiny black Mercedes. The car had a flat tire, and its owner, a white man in his 60s, wearing a suit worth more than their homes, was pacing beside it, furious. "Sir, you need help?" Malik asked politely, holding a wrench his uncle had taught him to use. The man spun around, his blue eyes sharp with suspicion. "Don't touch my car," he snapped. "I know what you're trying to do. Step back before I call the police." The words hit harder than any punch. The boys froze, their hands midair, their faces a mix of shock and humiliation. They'd stopped to help, but in his eyes, their skin made them guilty. A small crowd nearby turned to look, whispering. Jalen's lip trembled, but he stood tall. "We were just trying to help, sir." The man's voice dripped with contempt. "Help? Boys like you don't help, you take." For a second, no one breathed. The silence felt heavier than the sun. Then the man got into his car, slammed the door, and sped away, leaving dust and shame behind. If this already made your blood boil, hit like and subscribe right now, because stories like this are still happening and the world needs to hear them. That day changed everything for him and for them. That evening, the boys rode home in silence through cracked streets and fading sunlight. Their neighborhood was small, the kind of place where doors stayed open and kids shared dinner from each other's plates. Inside a narrow apartment, Miss Raven Johnson, Malik's grandmother, looked up from the kitchen sink as they walked in. "Y'all look like the sun beat the kindness right out of you. What happened?" Malik tried to smile, but his voice shook. "We tried to help a man with a flat tire. He thought we were stealing." Miss Raven froze, then sighed deep from her chest. "Baby, some folks see your skin before they see your heart." They sat down at dinner. Rice, beans, and cornbread, food made with more love than money. Jalen stared at his plate. "Why he hate us, Grandma? We didn't do nothing." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Because the world's still learning to see right. But you boys, you keep doing good. Don't let one blind man make you stop." Outside, the streetlights buzzed to life. Darius watched through the window as a police car rolled past, slowing near their block. He whispered, "Maybe helping ain't worth it no more." Miss Raven turned his chin toward her. "It's always worth it. Real kindness don't stop when it gets hurt. That's what makes it strong." The boys nodded quietly, their innocence bruised but not broken. They didn't know the man who insulted them would soon search for their names. Word spread fast in the neighborhood. Mrs. Turner from the corner store said she'd seen the whole thing. 3 kids trying to help, a rich white man yelling like they'd touched gold he owned by birthright. By sunset, everyone on the block knew. Malik avoided eye contact at school. Jalen kept his hoodie up, pretending not to hear the whispers. Darius just wanted to forget, but the sound of that man's voice, "Boys like you don't help, you take," played in his head all day. Across town, inside a mansion with marble floors and silent halls, Bradley Coleman poured himself a drink and stared out a window. He'd told himself he was right. Better safe than sorry. But the guilt gnawed at him like an echo he couldn't silence. In his mind, he saw the boys' faces again. No anger, just hurt. His wife, Eleanor, used to tell him, "Money can buy walls, Brad, but not peace." And peace hadn't visited him since that afternoon. He sat down at his desk, scrolling his phone, typing Oak Ridge Community Center, the name he'd overheard one of the boys mention. Something in his chest tightened. For the first time in years, Bradley Coleman, billionaire and boardroom tyrant, felt small. That night, he made a call to his driver. "Find me their names." By sunrise, his decision would shock an entire block. If this happened right in front of you, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if you want justice as much as I do, hit subscribe. The next morning, Bradley Coleman sat in the back of his car, his conscience louder than the engine. His driver, Sean Peters, glanced in the mirror. "Sir, are we really going there? That neighborhood?" Bradley's jaw tightened. "I'm not going to hide behind my gates anymore." He'd spent the night digging through school records, news clippings, community reports, and what he found humbled him to the core. Malik, age 12, straight-A student, raised by his grandmother after losing both parents. Jalen, a helper at the senior center, teaching elders how to read. Darius, caring for his sick mother while volunteering every weekend. None of them had fathers at home, just strong women holding their worlds together. Bradley sat back, whispering to himself, "I called them thieves." He called his assistant. "Get me contact for Oak Ridge Elementary." Quietly, "I want to help that school anonymously." Then softer, "and prepare the Rolls Royce. We're paying a visit." As the city skyline gave way to cracked pavements and flickering lights, guilt turned into purpose. For the first time in decades, the billionaire wasn't thinking about stocks or profits, only about 3 boys who showed him a man he'd forgotten to be. The next morning, his silver Rolls Royce stopped outside a broken apartment gate. The silver Rolls Royce gleamed like a ghost against the cracked sidewalks of Oak Ridge. Neighbors peeked from porches and windows, whispering, "Who's that rich man? What's he doing here?" Miss Raven Johnson stepped outside, her apron still on, squinting in disbelief. The car door opened, and out stepped Sean Peters, dressed in a black suit with white gloves. He approached her with calm respect. "Good morning, ma'am. Mr. Bradley Coleman would like a word with you and the boys, if you'd allow it." Raven's eyes narrowed. "You mean the same man who shouted at my grandbabies?" Sean nodded gently. "Yes, ma'am. He's here to make that right." Inside the car, Malik, Jalen, and Darius sat frozen, their knees bouncing with nerves. The air felt heavy, unsure. When Bradley finally stepped out, his posture wasn't proud anymore. His voice trembled. "I owe you all an apology." He looked at the boys, not with authority, but with shame. "I judged you before I even saw you. I saw skin, not people." The crowd quieted. Even the wind seemed to stop. Miss Raven folded her arms. "Took you long enough to see what was plain as day." Bradley nodded. "You're right, and I deserve every bit of that. But please, give me a chance to fix what I broke." He invited them to breakfast at his mansion, not as guests, but as equals. Miss Raven hesitated, then saw the sincerity in his eyes. "All right, but we're coming together. Nobody gets left behind." That afternoon, the boys and their families sat at a table longer than any room they'd ever been in. The billionaire poured juice with his own hands, not letting the servants touch a thing. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "You taught me something money never could, humility." For the first time in years, the billionaire's voice trembled, not from power, but from respect. Plate still warm, silence hung in the air as Bradley Coleman placed 3 white envelopes on the table. He looked at Miss Raven, then at the boys. "These aren't gifts," he said softly. "They're opportunities you already earned." Inside each envelope was a scholarship letter, full tuition, books, and living expenses from a foundation he'd quietly funded. Miss Raven's hands shook as she read the letter aloud. "College full ride?" Bradley nodded. "Your kindness deserves a future, and that future starts now." He turned to the women beside them. "I also spoke with my company directors. There are open positions: care coordinator, community manager, office assistant. You'll interview like anyone else, but I made sure you'll be seen for your worth, not your zip code." Tears welled in Jalen's mother's eyes. "You don't owe us this." Bradley's voice steadied. "Maybe not, but I owe you my change. I want my son's world to look like yours, where character matters more than color." Malik looked at him, hesitant. "Sir, why do all this for us?" Bradley smiled faintly. "Because when I was broken on that road, 3 boys stopped to help, and I nearly missed God's hand reaching out." That room filled with quiet gratitude. No music, no speeches, just human hearts finally meeting at the same level. Kindness, once insulted, returned dressed as grace. Months later, the Oak Ridge neighborhood looked a little brighter. The community center had new computers. The school roof no longer leaked, and Bradley Coleman's name was nowhere on the plaques, just the words, "Donated by a friend." Malik, Jalen, and Darius now spent their weekends teaching younger kids how to fix bikes, just like they once did. And every Sunday, a black SUV would quietly park on the corner. Bradley stepping out in jeans and a smile, bringing books and laughter instead of pride. One afternoon, as they shared lunch under a tree, Bradley said softly, "You boys didn't just change me. You reminded me what being human feels like." Miss Raven smiled. "Then don't forget it, Mr. Coleman. Keep paying it forward." He nodded, eyes glistening. "That's the plan. If you believe this should never happen again, share this now. And to my USA, UK, and Canadian viewers, your voice is power. Use it, because sometimes the ones we look down on are the ones sent to lift us up.